The text feature category recognizes exemplary journalism produced and published by Canadian media in print or online that is primarily text-based and not specifically investigative in nature. There are 5 finalists in this category. Leading off our finalists in this category is freelancer Lindsay Jones, whose piece titled "What Happened to Lionel Desmond?", an Afghanistan veteran whose war wouldn't end, published by the Globe and Mail. War is hell. After war, hell can take over, as it did with Lionel Desmond, an infantryman with the 2nd Battalion RCR based at CFB Gagetown, who was deployed to Afghanistan in 2007. Jones meticulously pieces together Desmond's struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder within the Canadian Forces and after being released from the military in 2015. Pieces that shattered forever on January 3rd, 2016, when Lionel entered his home in Upper Big Tracadie, Nova Scotia, shot his wife Shanna, 10-year-old daughter Aaliyah, and his mother Brenda before turning the gun on himself. The second finalist is Alison Motluck, whose piece Anatomy of a Surrogacy was published in the online magazine Hazlitt. Motluck takes us into the depths of surrogacy, into the corners of these arrangements that are not covered by the Federal Assisted Human Reproduction Act passed in 2004. We learn of a woman who agrees to carry a child for a couple, and the agreement signed between the 3 of them regarding the surrogacy. It includes payments, some of which are permitted under Canadian legislation and some of which are not, for the surrogate's expenses during gestation covered by a confidentiality clause. As the pregnancy becomes complex, 4 fetuses became 2, twins that hadn't been thought of, severe morning sickness, swelling, a premature birth, we're left learning how lacking legislation and regulations are in protecting women who choose to be surrogates in Canada. The next finalist is Michael Friscolanti with his piece The Russian Spies Who Raised Us, published by Maclean's. It was a shock to Edward and Pauline Foley in Toronto, as well as brothers Alex and Tim Foley, who were living in Boston, on June 29, 2010. Tracy Foley, who Ed and Pauline had buried after she died from meningococcal meningitis in Montreal in 1962, was the boy's mother, married to a Donald Heathfield. But both Tracy and Donald had stolen their assumed names. They were actually Elena Vavilova and Andrei Bezrukov, KGB spies deployed to Canada and then to the U.S. When it all came out in public and their parents were sent back to Russia, Alex and Tim were left, like the Foleys, trying to piece everything together. For the brothers, this also meant fighting for what they'd always assumed they'd had, Canadian citizenship. The next finalist is Vito Pugliese, whose entry, How Solar Energy Dreams Became a Nightmare for the Small Ontario Town of Blind River, was published in the Ottawa Citizen. Green energy dreams, politicians, consultants, and companies with ties to Ottawa, or based there, all have a connection to this small Ontario town. A town that's now facing a nightmare of debt, as Pugliese tells us in this teaser.
This is Blind River, a little dot on a map in northern Ontario. It has one main street and tax revenues of less than $6 million annually. But somehow, Blind River managed to borrow $49.5 million in taxpayer money for a solar project that was supposed to revitalize the community.
The fifth finalist is the Star Phoenix's Betty Ann Adam for her entry titled How I Lost My Mother, Found My Family, Recovered My Identity. Adam was taken from her mother when she was 3 years old, and the 60s scoop was the order of the day. Decades later, she reconnected with her mother, having the chance to get to know her before her death in 2006. This story, which is also the subject of an NFB documentary, is Adam's journey to achieve what many forced to walk in her trail have done.
Many of the adults who were children of the 60s scoop have reconnected with their communities and families, and that was the case in my family.